We need to make sure we are not doing these type of errors. So now let us understand different types of parametric tests. So as you already remember, parametric tests are used when the data is normally distributed. Okay, when the data is normally distributed, you're going to use parametric tests. All right. So what are the different parametric tests? What cases we are going to use parametric tests? Let us understand. Okay. So the first test is z-test. Okay, z-test. So if you have data, normally distributed data. So we are going to talk about only normally distributed data in parametric tests. So it will be represented in terms of mean plus or minus standard deviation, correct? Mean plus or minus standard deviation. For example, if we have two different sets of data, okay? Data 1, population 1. So we have data from population 1 and we have data from population 2. Okay, so let us start with z-test. So what is z-test? Z-test is used when we have to compare means of two different populations. Okay, so the point which you need to remember here is when we are comparing means of two different populations. Means of two different populations. Why mean? Because the data is normally distributed. In case of normally distributed data, what are we calculating? Mean. So when we have to compare means of two different populations, for example, there is population A here and then we have population B here. All right. So there is mean hemoglobin percentage of this particular population and then you have mean hemoglobin percentage in this particular population, that is B. So for example, we have 35 individuals here and 45 individuals here. Okay, so and we have mean hemoglobin percentages of these two populations. So if I want to see if there is difference between these two means, okay, if the means are significantly different or not, I'm going to use z-test. Okay, so point number one which you have to remember about z-test is it is used to compare means of two different populations. And point number two is you need to use z-test when the size is more than 30. Okay, that is when you call it as large sample. So large sample is sample size more than 30. So when the sample size is more than 30, you're going to use z-test to compare means. I hope it is clear. So let us look at an example now. Let me just read out this question for you. The mean IQ of 200 randomly selected boys of a college is 90. And that of 128 randomly selected girls of that college is 88. So as you can see, there is a difference, right? So boys IQ is 90 and girls IQ is lesser, it is 88. But what we have to know is whether this difference is statistically significant or not. Okay, that is what we are going to do using tests of significance. We are going to check whether there is statistically significant difference or not. And standard deviations also they have given, because whenever they give mean, they have to give standard deviations. It is 10 in case of boys and 8 in case of girls respectively. Test whether there is a significant difference between IQ of boys and girls at 5% level of significance. Usually 5% is kept as level of significance. So we want to know whether the mean IQ, okay, is different statistically or not. If the difference is statistically significant or not, we want to know. So that is when we use z-test. So why are we using z-test here? The sample size is more than 30, it is 200 and here it is 128. That is the reason we are using z-test. So I hope z-test is clear. Only 2 points you need to remember here. It is used when the sample size is more than 30 and point number 2, very important, it is used to compare the means between two different populations. Is it clear? Yeah. Coming to student t-test. So by the name student, it is a pen name of the person who invented this particular test. Okay. So student t-test is used for the same purpose. Okay, it is used to compare means. Okay, compare means between two different populations. Two different populations. Similar to z-test, right? But what is the difference here? It is used in case of small samples. That is when the data is of smaller sample size, that is 30. But sometimes what happens when you look at the articles in your journals, they can use student t-test. They would have used student t-test up to 100 sample size, 120 sample size. But ideally speaking, it should be used only when the sample size is less than 30. All right. So remember, student t-test is used to compare means between two different groups and when the sample size is less than 30. And another important point you need to know is other names. It's also called as unpaired t-test. Unpaired t-test or independent t-test. independent t-test. Clear? So let us look at an example for this as well. The chest circumference in centimeters of 10 normal and malnourished children of the same age group is given below. Okay, normal, you can see the values 42 till 52, you have the range, and malnourished 35 to 51. Okay, so these are the values given, and we want to know whether there is a difference with respect to the means of these two populations, these two groups. So how do we do that? We use student's t-test. Okay, student t-test, because the sample size is less than 30 in this case. So moving on to paired t-test. So we saw student t-test is also called as unpaired t-test. So now what is paired t-test? So when the data is paired observations, okay, when we have paired observations, also called as before after observations. Before after observations. So for example, let us assume there are 10 individuals. Okay, I checked their hemoglobin percentage. Okay, I checked their hemoglobin percentage, and I supplement all of them with iron tablets. Okay, I supplement them with iron tablets, and I check their hemoglobin percentage of the same individuals. I'm checking the hemoglobin percentage of the same individuals after 3 months, say 3 months. Okay, so here baseline I've checked the hemoglobin percentage, and after 3 months I'm checking the hemoglobin percentage again, and I'm comparing these two values. So this is what is paired observation. So whereas in case of unpaired t-test, it was of different groups, right? Normal and malnourished. Whereas here, same groups, the individuals are same. So we did the baseline assessment, we supplemented them with something, and again we are checking their hemoglobin percentage after a particular period of time. So it is the same set of individuals. We are having two different observations, before and after. So that is what is known as paired t-test. Alright. So let us look at an example. On a group of anemic patients, an iron preparation was administered, and the hemoglobin levels of the patients before and after therapy were noted. The same example. So patient 1, before therapy, the hemoglobin percentage was 5.1. In case of after therapy, it was 10.2. Okay, there is a raise. Similarly, patient 5, 3.5 before therapy, after therapy 8.5. So if I want to know whether this difference, before and after difference, is significant or not, I'm going to use paired t-test. Okay, so the only thing you need to remember about paired t-test is it is used for paired observations. So it is the same set of individuals. We are comparing before and after values. Okay, so remember before after value. So in your exams, they'll give you different scenarios, okay? They'll give you examples, and you need to identify the test of significance which is more appropriate in that particular case. So you need to look for words like this to see if it is appropriate to use paired t-test or not. So moving on to one-way ANOVA and two-way ANOVA. What is ANOVA first of all? ANOVA is analysis of variance. Short form for analysis of variance is ANOVA. Okay? So when do you use one-way ANOVA? So when there are more than 2 groups. What do you mean by more than 2 groups? There can be 3 groups, 4 groups, 5 groups, so on. Okay. When there are more than 2 groups, that is starting from 3 onwards, you can use ANOVA. Okay. What is the example? So here you can see iron intake in milligrams for different villages. Okay. Village 1, the iron intake is 11.5, 12.5, 18, etc. Similarly, village 2 you have values, village 3 you have values, village 4 you have values. Okay, so there are more than 2 groups. There are more than 2 groups, right? There are 4 groups here. In such cases, you are going to use ANOVA. Is it clear? ANOVA is used when there are more than 2 groups. Okay, when there are more than 2 groups. Okay, so this is when you're going to use ANOVA, that is analysis of variance, and this is one-way ANOVA I'm talking about. So what is two-way ANOVA? So you saw different villages here. If there are subgroups within the villages, okay, if there are subgroups, so if villages are there, if there are different subgroups under it, we are going to use two-way ANOVA. Let us look at an example. So here we see iron intake for different villages 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then you have iron intake during different antenatal periods, that is period 1, trimester 1, trimester 2, trimester 3. In such cases, we are going to use two-way ANOVA. Okay, when there are subgroups, okay, within each group, we are going to use two-way ANOVA. Okay, so this is about two-way ANOVA. So this was about parametric tests. So you have studied 5 different tests. What are the 5 different tests? Z-test, student t-test, paired t-test, one-way ANOVA, two-way ANOVA. Alright.